Are you here for the interview? My mom and the woman were occupied using a towel to wipe off her shoes when I yelled out to her, so they didn't answer. After seeing them with interest, the woman acknowledged me and uttered a soft, "Oh." The story that would significantly alter my life started the instant our eyes locked. Kyle is my name. With a mother who worked part-time and a father who worked in an office, my family was normal when I was born. My dad was always happy and lively like a child himself, spending time with me playing catch or running around whenever he had an early day or was off. That's why I adored him. Around the time I joined middle school, however, things with my dad began to shift. My mother was usually the one who dealt with me throughout those years when I felt like rebelling against my parents. Thus, my father was never present. He claimed that his job kept him busy and that he frequently returned home late at night after being promoted to section manager. He would leave even on his days off to complete his work, and occasionally he wouldn't return until the following evening. When he began wearing perfume whenever he went out, I knew something was wrong, even though at first I assumed it was just the way things were when you advanced in your career. Although he had never given much thought to his appearance, he began to pay more attention to it after he was promoted to manager. He seemed like a different person than the father I had known when I saw him in this state. I guess it wasn't odd for a middle schooler, but as a family, we stopped going places, and my dad and I seldom spoke at all. Every weekend, as if by habit, he went out alone. I couldn't help but feel skeptical even as a child. I so assumed that my mother must have sensed something as well. My dad didn't conceal his behavior, though. He was open about them, even brazen. On his days off, he would go somewhere and come back with a new perfume smell. However, my mother remained silent and said nothing. She seemed to lose her spark with time, and I couldn't understand why she tolerated it. She stopped working a part-time job and began spending most of her time at home. When we went shopping on the weekends, she would become nervous when people stared at her or when neighbors murmured to one another. During those times, I could hear her breathing getting harder and heavier. I questioned whether there was a problem with her health. I became so concerned about it that I even looked up the symptoms on the internet. At that point, I became aware of a disorder known as social anxiety disorder. It has an impact on those who find it difficult to interact with others or to be in large groups. I didn't anticipate it at the moment. I'd assumed that because she usually gave me a warm smile and used soft language when she spoke to me at home. "Make sure to eat well," she said as she prepared nutritious meals and encouraged me as my admission examinations drew near. However, as I've become older, I've come to see how hard she was pushing herself. She must have been trying to hide her weaknesses at the time, so I wouldn't be concerned. I made an effort to comprehend and honor her unsaid challenges as I studied for my own high school admission examinations. I would softly say, "Take your time," when her breathing would get shallow, as if she were having a panic attack. "Take a slow breath." Even though I made an effort to support her, I felt more than just resentment because of my dad's self-centered behavior. My dad would always arrive home late, smelling like someone else's cologne. I felt a rush of repulsion every time I smelled it. I started avoiding everyone, regardless of gender, who used artificial fragrances after that. Then, shortly after I got accepted into high school, my mom firmly asked my dad for a divorce. She requested that he pay for my tuition and child support through high school and college, and their divorce was finalized. My dad packed his things into a large suitcase, and as he was about to leave, he turned to me. "Kyle, you're always welcome to come see me anytime," he said, wearing the same familiar expression. But I couldn't bring myself to answer. Alone, he opened the front door and walked out. After hearing the door shut with a final thud, my mom turned to me. "Kyle, I'm sorry it came to this. You're free to see your dad anytime or even live with him if you want. The choice is yours," she spoke slowly, carefully considering my feelings. But as a fellow man, I felt nothing but contempt for my father. I had no intention of seeing him again, and I took his place in caring for my mom without even realizing it. My rebellious face had shifted into a genuine desire to protect her. "I'll stay here with you, Mom. I don't need to see him anymore." Seeing her tearful eyes, I vowed that she'd never have to wear that sad expression again. That was the day I made that promise. After that, life with my mom became peaceful. We had a modest savings, plus child support from my dad. My mom started working a full-time job. She worked hard and still took care of my everyday needs. We couldn't afford luxuries, but life wasn't bleak. Gradually, her smile returned, and we finally found some inner peace. Her panic attacks lessened over time, and she stopped worrying about others' gazes. From then on, I focused on getting into a good college, finding a good job, and eventually making her life easier. Fueled by this determination, I studied hard. In the end, my efforts paid off, and I got accepted into my first-choice college. Even in college, my dislike for perfume didn't go away. By that time, most students had part-time jobs and started caring about cool shoes and fashionable clothes. I made an effort with my appearance too, in my own way. But just seeing a group of girls spraying branded perfume in the classroom and showing off the scent to each other gave me goosebumps. That sharp smell pricked my nose, and the unwanted memory of my dad's smug face flashed through my mind. Unconsciously, I started keeping my distance from people who wore heavy scents, and I became more selective with friends. College life was quiet, but enjoyable enough, even without being the center of attention. In my third year, I jumped right into job hunting preparations, attending various seminars. I was determined to get into a respected company, better than my dad's. With that mindset, I threw myself into my job search. My efforts paid off, and I received an offer from my desired company. With graduation in sight, one day while I was at school, my mom called me. "Hello, what's up?" Since my mom rarely called, an odd feeling stirred inside me. I hoped it wasn't anything serious as I answered, but her voice had a different tone as she spoke. "Kyle, Grandpa just passed away. Can you come back to my parents' house soon?" It was the news that my grandfather on my mom's side had passed away. Trying to steady my voice, I replied, "I understand," and ended the call. My maternal grandma had already passed, and my grandpa had run a candy wholesaler. He also ran a small candy shop in front of the warehouse, where neighborhood kids and adults would come to shop. One corner of the spacious warehouse was packed with shelves full of candies for customers to pick from. Grandpa was always at the counter, chatting with kids and handing out little extras, clearly loving his work. Like the other kids, I'd go to his store, and he'd smile warmly at me. "Oh, Kyle," he'd pat my head and say, "Don't tell your mom," as he slipped me some extra treats. Grandpa was such a wonderful person, always laughing with the kids and meeting them at eye level. Once I got to middle school, I started buying fast food and snacks from convenience stores more often, so I rarely went to Grandpa's candy shop. Hearing of his passing, a wave of sadness and loneliness washed over me. I'd been busy with job hunting, part-time work, and spending time with friends, so I hardly ever saw him anymore. As I headed back to my hometown, I kept thinking about how we tend to lose the people we love most so suddenly. Though it had been a long time since I'd last seen Grandpa, I never imagined our reunion would come in such a way. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably as his only daughter, my mom, decided to take over his candy wholesaler business. At first, she planned to shut down the shop, clear out the warehouse, and sell the land. But while cleaning out Grandpa's home, she found the diary he'd written, which changed her mind and led her to keep the shop going. The diary was filled with daily reflections about the kids who visited, like the ones who hit the jackpot on a prize game, or the new candies he'd stocked that weren't selling well. Everyday moments, conversations with customers, each entry painted a picture of his days. Finding the diary must have stirred something in my mom. My grandfather had protected this candy wholesale shop for years, and now it was her turn to carry on. After learning about my mother's hopes, I decided to turn down the job offer I had secured and chose to help her keep the shop running. Kyle, why did you decline the job offer you'd already accepted? Mom asked with a look of concern. I just realized it wasn't what I really wanted to do. Plus, seeing how much Grandpa loved this candy shop made me want to try it for myself. She didn't fully agree with my decision right away. However, I had already turned down my job offer. On top of that, I'd be graduating from college soon, and not wanting me to drift aimlessly, she reluctantly agreed to let me work at the candy wholesale shop. So, I began work as the second-generation president of our small candy wholesale business. Just because I became the company president doesn't mean I could handle the work right away. I didn't even have experience as a working adult. Only 2 older men remained from the previous staff, handling warehouse tasks. So, besides managing the store, I took on customer service, negotiations, and sales. We managed to hold on after Grandpa's passing, and for a time, there was a surge in interest among younger people in old-fashioned candy shops, bringing a steady stream of customers. But once a large supermarket opened nearby, foot traffic dropped sharply, and we realized that retail sales alone couldn't sustain the business. So we switched to focusing exclusively on wholesaling. I've now been in charge for 4 years, and while we've managed so far, our 2 warehouse workers recently left due to health issues, one with back pain and the other in poor overall health. It would probably help to hire someone new, but who would apply for a place like this? Besides, the company doesn't have enough funds to spare for additional wages. I resolved to handle as much as possible with just Mom and myself. Each day, we worked long hours sorting stock in the warehouse, then tackling administrative work late into the night. I had been pushing forward desperately, but it must have been incredibly hard on my mom. One day, she collapsed while working in the storage room. I heard a loud crash as a cardboard box fell, and I ran over to check on her. Mom. There she was, collapsed on the floor. Panicking, I quickly called an ambulance. At the hospital, the diagnosis was exhaustion from overwork. Dr. Nolan diagnosed her with exhaustion and urged that she take some time to rest. I was going to protect my mom, and with that resolve, I decided to help her run the candy shop together. But I never thought I'd end up causing her pain. As I looked at her sleeping face on the hospital bed, I felt so guilty that tears streamed down my face without even realizing it. They told me she'd need to stay in the hospital for 2 or 3 days. Although I wanted to grab some things for her, I didn't want her to wake up alone, so I sat by her side that day, lost in thoughts about our future. We needed help, so I would post a job ad. Even just one extra person would ease Mom's workload. While thinking about this, I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of my mom calling my name. Kyle. She spoke in a faint, strained voice. Oh, Mom, you're awake. I'm so relieved. How are you feeling? Mom looked around, puzzled, and asked, Why am I here? Where is this? It's a hospital. You collapsed yesterday, and they brought you here by ambulance, I explained. She started to sit up. Oh, I'm sorry to trouble you. I'd better hurry home and get everything ready. I held her back gently but firmly. Mom, don't worry about the deliveries. I'll take care of them. Dr. Nolan said you need rest. You'll be here for 2 or 3 days. I'll head home now and bring you whatever you need. Upon hearing this, she suddenly began to cry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she murmured over and over. Why are you apologizing, Mom? You just pushed yourself a little too hard. Now let's focus on resting and getting you well again. I reassured her, comforting her as she wept. After heading home to gather her belongings, I went back to work. I had to prepare the orders due that day and get them ready for the delivery service. Working tirelessly, I managed to get everything done on my own. The next 2 days were so hectic that I barely remembered them. I was working nonstop. Managing to handle everything on my own made me feel even more strongly that I needed to step up and lead as president. When Mom was discharged, I told her I decided to put out a job ad. We were looking for a part-time accountant. The wages aren't particularly high. It's been a week since the job posting went up, and not a single person has applied. Nothing today either. Doing everything by myself left me exhausted, and I found myself grumbling alone in the storage room. All that came out were sighs. But 3 days later, the phone finally rang with an application. Today was the interview. I knew it was a lot to put on one person, but I couldn't help feeling hopeful about this chance. That's what I had been thinking when it was a woman just a year younger than me. I hoped she would be someone simple, not flashy, and without any perfume. As the interview time approached, I heard Mom's loud voice from the front entrance, which used to be the storefront. Oh my, what should I do? My mom said, clearly thrilled that someone had applied. She'd have been eagerly cleaning the windows since morning. We don't want to give a messy impression, she said, filling a bucket with water. As I worked in the office, Mom returned with a worried look, grabbed a towel, and hurried back to the entrance. What's going on? Even though I called out to her, my mom was in such a hurry that she didn't seem to hear me. Curious about what was happening, I followed her to the entrance, where I saw a woman in a suit standing there with a stunned expression on her face. Are you here for the interview? I called out to her, but my mom and the woman were busy wiping the shoes with towels and didn't respond. Puzzled, I watched as the woman noticed me and let out a small "oh." Mom looked up, noticing I was standing behind her. Oh, Kyle, this is the person here for the interview. But I accidentally spilled the bucket of water all over her shoes, Mom explained, and I looked over at the woman. Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize. The woman, who seemed serious and professional, bowed her head apologetically. No, it's my fault for leaving the bucket here. My mom apologized to the woman, looking genuinely sorry. Seeing her, I apologized as well. I'm truly sorry. I took a step closer to the woman, who then looked up and met my gaze. As she held my gaze, she looked over at my mother and began shifting her eyes between us, her breathing growing progressively more shallow and rapid, almost as if she were hyperventilating. Ah, are you okay? Is something wrong? Unsure of how to handle the situation, I gestured for her to sit on the bench by the entrance. Are you all right? Should I get you some water? My mother, worried about the woman as well, glanced nervously at the stained water splashes on her suit, hoping they wouldn't leave marks. I'm okay. She tried to speak, but the words were barely escaping her labored breathing. Take it easy. Just breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale, I instructed. Following my instructions, she began to take slow, deep breaths. After a moment, she seemed to regain her composure. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. She lowered her gaze and fell silent. I tilted my head, puzzled by her reaction, but a thought crossed my mind. She reminded me of my mother years ago. Feeling a connection, I decided to speak to her gently. You're here for the interview, right? At my question, she silently pulled her resume from her bag and handed it to me. Let's head to the office. It's more comfortable in there. When I said that, the woman followed me in silence. I could see from her slightly trembling shoulders that she was struggling to hold back, doing her best to endure interacting with others. So I kept my back to her and spoke without making eye contact. Your feet must be soaked, cold. Do you have anything to change into? Are you all right? In a strained voice, she shook her head, replying, I'm fine. I gestured toward the office sofa, and she nodded slightly before sitting down. My mother followed, sitting next to me. As I glanced over her resume, my eyes widened in surprise. Her job history listed some well-known companies along with impressive certifications like Certified Financial Planner and Certified Bookkeeper. She even had a forklift operator certification. Wow, you have some impressive qualifications. I'm grateful that someone so skilled would apply here, my mother remarked warmly, but the woman remained motionless. With such a career at a major company, may I ask why you left? At this, she flinched slightly, brushing her bangs aside as she looked up at us, seemingly preparing to answer. However, under our gaze, her voice caught, and she fell silent again. My mother seemed to realize something as she observed her reaction. Perhaps she saw something familiar in this woman, but instead of addressing it directly, my mother tried to create a more comfortable atmosphere for her to speak. Sorry for staring like that. This place used to be my father's store. We stopped the retail side, but my son decided to keep the wholesale business going. Oh, and the guy next to me is my son, technically the president here. Well, Melissa, would you like to start with us tomorrow? Without consulting me, my mother introduced me and then decided on the spot to hire Melissa. Melissa looked at my mother in shock, her eyes wide with surprise. Mom, she hasn't even told us anything yet, I exclaimed. My mother placed her hand over my mouth, stopping me from saying more. Melissa simply nodded in silence without responding. The next day, Melissa arrived at the office just before 8:45. Good morning. My mom was mindful of Melissa, taking care not to put any pressure on her. Good morning. I greeted her, and she replied in a small voice, Good morning. Her voice was faint, but she answered me nonetheless. From there, my mother guided her through the tasks with little conversation, and the workday ended quickly. Melissa's work ethic was impeccable. Every morning, she arrived 15 minutes before work started, settling at her desk to prepare for the day's tasks. She meticulously noted everything my mother instructed, completing tasks swiftly and even going above what was asked. At times, she'd even operate the forklift to help out in the warehouse. Melissa, you're a huge help with how fast you get things done. My mother praised her, gradually closing the distance between them. Melissa, rather than seeming uneasy, began smiling shyly in response. I felt a slight pang of jealousy as I watched them grow closer, leaving me somewhat on the sidelines. Here, I wanted to apologize for the mishap during your interview. Shopping for a young woman's clothes is always a delight. She presented Melissa with a new outfit she discreetly bought. Melissa looked surprised, trying to wave it off politely. Oh, it wouldn't fit me anyway, so don't worry, she said. Just take it, my mother insisted. Upon hearing that, Melissa replied clearly, Thank you very much. The next day, Melissa arrived at work wearing the clothes my mother had given her. Seeing this, my mother beamed with joy. You look adorable. It suits you well. Blushing, Melissa lowered her gaze, seemingly flustered. Typically, she wore simple pants and a shirt, but today she was in a padded dress. Watching her cheeks redden, I felt my heart skip a beat. Since then, Melissa gradually began sharing light-hearted conversations with my mother. It was around that time that a faint sweet scent began to linger around her. Her complexion also seemed brighter. When she smiled, twin dimples appeared on her cheeks. I found myself drawn to her, my gaze lingering on her more often. It didn't take long to realize I was developing feelings for her. Gradually, there came moments when Melissa and I would meet each other's gaze. Could she be interested in me too? I found myself wondering, maybe a little too optimistically. One day, as I returned from a sales visit, I overheard the two of them talking in the office. I paused by the door, unable to resist listening in. I figured Melissa might feel more at ease speaking with my mother alone, so I stayed outside. I thought he was my first real boyfriend since I started working, I heard her say clearly. My mother remained silent, simply listening. But he already had a serious girlfriend. Apparently, my coworkers had even placed bets on how long it would take for me, the straight-laced one, to open up to him. Finding that out was devastating. After that, I felt self-conscious all the time, like people were laughing at me whenever they looked my way. I just couldn't function at work anymore. After I resigned, I moved back home and pretty much isolated myself. I felt guilty about not contributing, so I focused on earning certifications. But stepping back into the workforce took a lot of courage. When I saw the job listing here, I thought I'd give it a try. It said part-time accounting, so I'm really glad I took the chance because meeting you two has been wonderful. After a soft chuckle from Melissa, my mother finally spoke. You've done so well, Melissa. You've really been so strong. Oh, and by the way, Kyle here doesn't have a hint of romance in his life, so he's perfectly safe and highly recommended. Whether my mother was joking or serious, I couldn't tell. But she started talking about me, listening from the hallway. I blushed involuntarily, and then I heard a voice that made my heart race. Yes, I think Kyle is a wonderful person. I couldn't control the fluttering in my chest, so I stepped outside for a moment, then returned, deliberately closing the front door a bit louder than usual. I'm back, I announced, walking into the office with a casual expression. The two of them looked up at me with warm smiles. Welcome back, they said, and Melissa followed with a smile. Welcome back. I glanced at her and felt a rush of nervous excitement as she smiled at me a bit puzzled. Speaking of which, we still haven't celebrated your arrival, Melissa. How about the three of us go out for dinner tonight? Riding on the confidence I'd gained from overhearing her words, I made the suggestion without thinking. I'll sit this one out, my mother replied. Melissa, go let him treat you to something fancy. I looked over at Melissa. Oh, thank you very much. That dinner marked the start of many outings together. With two people close in age, spending time together, it was only natural that emotions would start to stir. On one of our dates, just as my mother had intended, we officially began dating. The sweet fragrance that always lingered around her didn't bother me in the least. I used to find perfumes unpleasant as they reminded me of bitter memories with my father. But with her, it was different. Not unpleasant at all. Was it because I'd grown up, or perhaps because in some way, I'd come to feel a bit of gratitude toward my father for helping me get through college? One day, while I was thinking about such things, Melissa and I were working late. She suggested taking a short break and placed a cup of coffee beside me. She sat back down, took a sip, and then asked me a question. Why were you so kind to me when we first met? Surprised by the sudden question about that day, I answered plainly. Someone close to me experienced something similar. You reminded me of them, and I thought maybe you were going through something hard too. That's right, she said, smiling warmly. I'm really glad I found the courage to come for the interview. Encouraged by her question, I decided to ask one that had been on my mind. I've been wondering, what's the perfume you're wearing? Melissa answered my question like this. It's lavender scented. Kyle, your mom gave it to me as a gift. Something about it having a good effect on the autonomic nervous system or something like that. She said with a bit of an embarrassed laugh at her hazy memory. Then she continued, but you know, when I smell it, I feel so calm. I used to be terrified of people's looks and whispers, but now it's like my own little remedy. Hearing her story, I felt a quiet understanding within myself. I realized my mother had made her peace with the past. After all, she'd given Melissa a perfume that reminded her of my father's presence. She must truly be over it now. Relieved, I murmured to myself about her, "Your smile is my peace of mind." It was far too embarrassing to say that to her face, so instead, I simply said, "Thank you." Melissa looked at me with a curious expression, not quite understanding what I meant. No, it's me who should be thanking you. Because of you and your mom, I'm here working and able to meet you. So I'm really, really grateful. She spoke clearly, as if to say that her gratitude was no less than mine. Smiling, I responded while thinking to myself, it wasn't that I helped her recover. Rather, it was Melissa who freed both my mother and me from the painful memories tied to the scent of perfume. In the future, I knew I could keep smiling and laughing alongside her. I want to show my mother this side of us as soon as possible, and I want to protect Melissa's smile now and forever.